everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Tracy and I'm really excited to share the tutorial on this Milkmaid top. I'm back in California, the natural light is so nice and it's just great to spend some time with my family. My Etsy shop is still open for sewing patterns, but I'm not going to be able to ship anything until I go back to New York, which is January 11th. I apologize in advance if anyone orders anything. I won't be able to send it out until then, but my sewing patterns are still available to purchase because they're instant downloads. The sewing pattern for this Milkmaid top will be available on my Etsy shop and I will link it down below. For this sewing pattern, you can use any woven fabric. It's going to work just great. I hope you guys can recreate this top, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I start by taking the cotton eyelet shirt and I just start removing the sleeves and cutting at the side seam, so I separate the front and the back just so I have more fabric to work with. And then I take my sewing pattern and I start with a cup. So on the PDF, you're gonna have to connect the cup because it's cut into two pieces because it was hard to fit onto one 8.5 by 11 sheet. So just connect that and you'll get like a full cup. As you can see, this is my pattern. Just excuse the crustiness of it. I make my drafts on like brown paper and then I make it into a really nice PDF with like directions on it. So just cut that out. And since I'm using an eyelet fabric, I just cut out one cup first, and then after I cut the first one out, I just try to find the mirror image of that print because I did want the eyelet to be consistent throughout the whole piece, so I'm just making sure it's the same mirrored image on each side. I take the rest of this fabric and then I just like fold it in half to find the center, and I'm just taking my back pattern piece and cutting one on the fold like this. And now I take the leftover and I take the front underbust pieces and I cut out two. So your right side has the buttons and your left side has the buttonholes. So you just want to make sure you know the difference, but I just marked it on the PDF. And I'm cutting out one of each. And don't forget to line up your straight grain line to the straight grain of the fabric. And I'm just finding the mirror image of this eyelet for the underbust piece just because I want my pattern to be continuous, but it's not necessary. After cutting out all of my pieces, I place right sides together and just sew the side seams and sew the underbust and the back together like so. And I just take it to my regular sewing machine, stitch a 1/4 inch, and then I just like to overlock the end so it's nice on the inside, but you can just use a zigzag stitch to clean finish your ends. After sewing the side seams, I push the seam allowance towards the back and then I just do a top stitch right on that seam just so it looks really nice, and then the seam's flat on the inside. And now you have a really nice looking frame and the inside's really clean. And now you want to just overlock the cup and the center front and gore portion like that, just so it's cleaned before we start sewing, but you can just use your zigzag stitch. And now at the center front of both pieces, I'm just going to mark 3/4 of an inch and then just fold on that line. So I fold on that 3/4 line and just fold it back, and I place pins to just keep everything down, and I take it to my sewing machine and just do an 1/8 of an inch top stitch like so. And then I want to make another top stitch to hold the rest of that seam allowance on the back. It will also act as a channel for your buttons and buttonholes. After stitching that, you want to fold the top of the gore a 1/4 inch down and just do a top stitch so it's super clean at the center front. So the frame is completely sewn now pretty much, and now it's time to take your cup pieces and you're just gonna like gather, and with elastic it's gonna fit like really nice like this. So that's what we're gonna do. So take your pattern piece, and on the pattern, I marked the dotted line at the top of the cup 1 inch. So you want to just mark 1 inch on the top of the cup because that's going to be your fold line. Fold that seam allowance underneath and I just place pins. And you just want to ease everything in just because it's a curve. So just make sure you're like easing it in and just making it flat as possible. I know curve's kind of hard, but it's manageable. After pinning down that 1 inch, you want to just like sew right along the bottom edge of that seam allowance. So I'm sewing right next to that edge, and I'm just doing a straight stitch all the way down, and don't forget to back tack. After stitching that down, you want to just do another stitch like 3/8 of an inch away from that line, and this is going to be your channel for your elastic. So as you can see, I'm just following that edge stitch and just sewing right next to it, so it's like about 3/8 of an inch apart. Now you want to cut your elastic. So my elastic is about 1/4 or like 5/16 of an inch wide, and I'm just cutting out 5-inch strips. So I'm just going to cut out 2 5-inch strips, and you want to just put a safety pin at the end and just feed it through that channel we just made on the top of the cup. And it's just a push and pull method with the safety pin. That's how I get it through. And when you reach the end of the elastic to the end of the fabric, you just want to pin the elastic down so it doesn't move, and you just want to keep pushing and pulling until you reach the other side and just pin it down, and your cup just gathers. And since the elastic is pinned, you want to just take it to your sewing machine and just do a zigzag stitch on both ends of that elastic. Now it's time to gather the bottom of the cup, so you want to just set your sewing machine to a stitch size 5, and you're just going to stitch from the notches indicated on your pattern, so just mark those with like chalk on your fabric, and you're just going to just stitch in between those. And after you stitch at the very edge, you're going to just pull on the back thread, and you can see your cup starts to gather, and you just want to gather your cup until it measures 9 inches. So after gathering the cup to 9 inches at the bottom, it's going to fit perfectly in the frame. So now I'm just lining up the elastic channel with the top of the gore. I like how the cup looks when it's a little bit above the gore. It's like a cute little touch. I pinned the rest of the cup down and just lining up the armhole, and then just easing in the rest of the gathered cup to it, and I just pin everything down. And now we can sew the cup in. So I'm just taking it to my sewing machine, and I stitch a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the cup, and I just go slowly so I can just get the gathers. After stitching the cups in, you want to just push that seam allowance towards the hem and just do a top stitch around the underbust. So just following that line, I did like about 1/8 of an inch top stitch away from that seam. And at the gore, I just fold the seam allowance on the ruffle underneath so it's not visible, and then I just do a top stitch on that so it's nice and clean. I also cut out a piece of elastic for the center back because the pattern was slightly bigger on me, so I just wanted to take it in at the center back, and I just decided to add elastic because it would just be able to stretch and be more comfortable. I cut a piece of elastic about 11 1/4 inches. I cut out 1.5 inch strips from the sleeves so I could just use it as like a bias binding for the underarm, and I'm just pinning this down, and I'm taking it to the sewing machine and sewing 3/8 of an inch because that's what I want my bias width to be finished. So I'm sewing 3/8 of an inch. After sewing that down, you want to just fold the binding. So I just fold it once towards that edge and then fold it again so it's clean, and I just pin this all the way down, and when I reach the end, I just kind of fold it in and on top of itself so it's cleaned at the very edge like so. After pinning everything in place, I just do a top stitch right next to that seam. So I'm about 1/8 of an inch away, and I just stitch it all the way down, and don't forget to back tack. And I take my elastic and just feed it through that binding, and you just want to take it to your sewing machine and just do a zigzag stitch on that side seam on the elastic to hold it in place. And I know this is kind of confusing, but I did this in a different tutorial, and I'll just link this portion there. And now it's time to do the hem, so I'm just overlocking the hem just so it's clean on the inside, and I fold it underneath 1/4 and just do a top stitch. And now I'm making spaghetti, so I just cut out an 1.75" strips for my straps and folded right sides together. If you need an in-depth tutorial, I will link it for straps. So I'm just using slides, and I recommend doing like 2 slides and 2 rings for your adjustable straps, but all I had was slides, so that's what I'm using. And I'm just using a safety pin to turn my straps inside out. And now that I have 2 straps, I just cut out 2 small 1.5" strap pieces, because those are going to be the loops for the bottom part of the ring. And then my final straps ended up measuring 19.5. So now I'm just looping the smaller portion of the strap over a slide like that, and just repeating that to another slide, because that's all I had. But you can use rings, but slides work for this too. So those are my tabs for the back. And now I'm just taking a strap and just feeding it through a slide. So up and through, and then I'm just leaving like a 1/2" seam allowance, and just gonna pin that, and I just want to do a stitch there, so I'm just gonna repeat it to the other strap as well, and I'm gonna stitch down the tabs too. After stitching that down, you want to just take 1 tab and 1 strap, and with the end of the strap, you're going to just feed that through the ring. Well, I have a slide, but mostly you should use a ring. And then I'm just going to go up and through that slide. And now you have an adjustable strap, so you're just going to repeat this to the other side. And after making the straps adjustable, you're going to just measure 2.5 inches away from the center back and just place your straps there. And I'm just pinning those tabs down, and I'm just going to use a zigzag stitch to secure those. I take the top of the strap and then just place it on the strap point of the cup, and I just do a zigzag stitch right on that corner. Yay, we're almost done. So on your sewing pattern, I have marked your buttonholes and button placement, so I'm just doing my buttonholes with my buttonhole foot, and if you need an in-depth tutorial, I can link that as well. And I used these really cute pearl shank buttons on this top, and I completely love it.